So Jacobin has an article about some people in the United States government want to turn this Ukraine situation into another Afghanistan for Russia. Now, and the article is saying that it's a horrible idea, and for once, every now and again, rarely, I do have to agree with this magazine. Um, Now, I knew that's from the time this war started. I knew this is exactly what the Americans were trying to. I mean, American is such a broad term, not Americans as a whole, but I'm talking about the American, the intelligence agencies, the CIA, the NATO, and you know what I mean, like the military people. They were just, to me, it seems that that's what they wanted all along, because apparently they were just admitting all these countries into NATO left and right, and kept expanding NATO eastward, um, toward Russia. And I'm pretty sure that they wanted to provoke Russia into doing some kind of military, or just getting, yeah, provoked, agitated, and getting into a military confrontation where they could bog Putin down in some insurgency warfare, or really have just a huge quagmire, embarrassing him. Maybe there'd be a coup, or crippling him, or isolating him, and then imposing heavy sanctions. And after the heavy sanctions, like his government would, like, somebody would topple him from the government. But I mean, what the ridiculous part about that thinking is, like, even if you topple Putin, you're gonna have, like this, when the Soviet Union broke up in the 90s, you're gonna have years of just huge turmoil, Russians suffering super bad, crazy amount of corruption, all sorts of black markets, all these companies being private. I mean, changing hands, people buying these companies pennies on the dollar, reselling them. And to end all that corruption, you'd probably have another younger Putin that's probably going to reign for another 30 years. So, as if you're going to see a Russia. So America's really afraid of China. So you're going to topple Putin, and you're going to install some, this time, even though you failed in the 90s, you're going to install a Western-friendly, quote-unquote, democracy, and that's going to put, pressure on China. What I don't think that's likely, but I don't think they really care about that much of, the suffering of Russians and their economy. They just, whatever, if they want to roll the dice, roll the dice, whatever. That's fine. That's fine to them. So they want to drag out the war as much as possible. That's why I kind of think that a lot of the coverage has been very, you know, has been very pro-Ukrainian, as far as even running a bunch of fake news and just propping them up as much as possible, propping up their morale to hold out, even though that probably they will have to succumb. They will succumb to Russian bombing eventually. Um, but just bogging it, keep singing those, like the Javelin missiles, try to inflict as many casualties as possible, which is probably an ironic way. I would think that all these Javelin, all these weapons are going to end up in Ukrainian and Russian mafias, and they're going to be sold in South America. But it will be ultra ironic if they end up possibly hitting America, in the country where it invades next. Um, if anything, I think the most prudent thing to do would be to have a diplomatic settlement of this. Now with, apparent reporting that 12,000 Russian soldiers have died, and who knows how many Ukrainians, and so much cost and so much blood has been shed that nobody can just say, oh, okay, my bad, mulligans. Some people, there needs to be a serious deal drawn here, and I don't think either, if the Russia gets a better deal or Ukrainian gets a better deal or whatever, to me, that, like, in the long term, it will not matter. As long as the country has open and free markets and not horrible corruption, and people from all over the world can invest, people can start companies, the country is economically is going to be very successful and have a good, nice standard of living. Um, don't care about where the line between the end of Ukraine and Russia is drawn, which is it's kind of pretty ridiculous thing to worry about. I mean, yes, there is a geopolitical strategic thing with the Crimea, the naval port and stuff like that, but it'd seem that after such a tragedy, these things can be ironed out and compromises can be made on both sides, especially with Ukraine joining NATO and just become a neutral country. I mean, stop. Basically, Ukraine is like a little kid, and Russia is like a big kid, big bully neighbor. But then there's like a bigger neighbor, America, that said, "Hey, we're going to be on your side, whatever." And then it start messing with like it's like bigger neighbor, and then the big neighbor spazzed out and start beating it up or whatever. Well, it's like, well, America caused it; they instigated it. I mean, they used to be neighbors. They used to so many Russians vacation in Ukraine. I mean, there was a lot of mutual love, right? I think all this is the division is from NATO. Well, it could be even a culture war too. It could be the East versus the West, but America pushing on NATO and stuff like that definitely is not helping. So the article goes into saying why having Ukraine turn into Afghanistan would be horrible for everybody. So from everlasting fountain of bad ideas, that Washington establishment, now comes another one: turn Ukraine into Iraq or Afghanistan-style quagmire for Russia. This idea has been floating around national security circles for a while. Clinton pointed out to the Soviet Union quagmire in the 1980s, Afghans, where there were a lot of countries supplying arms and advice, and even some advisors to those who were recruited to fight Russia. The model that people are now looking at towards Biden administration and its allies now predicting that's the very thing that Biden have explored and planned for. The idea since last year, U.S. and Europe officials now reportedly discussing it. Biden's somewhat cryptic allusion that his State of the Union address to Russian President Vladimir Putin having to pay a continuing high price over the long run hints at such plans. Let's think about what this means for the welfare of Ukrainians themselves. Having to live in a permanent war zone doesn't tend to promote health and long life. Nearly 20,000 Afghan civilians were killed. So little under 108,000 Iraqi civilians were killed. And even after the U.S. exit, 90,000 civilians were killed in the years since, thanks to the conditions created by the U.S. war. And that doesn't even take account the health and other impacts that will come with the ongoing destruction of infrastructure, perpetual disruption of life, economic activity. Yep. Oh, wait, economic activity? Jacobin, are you saying that economic activity is a good thing? Does that cause higher standard of living and longer life and happiness? Or you mean like just economic activity from the government doing all this stuff? There are also significant arrests in the United States and the West. At one point, her MSNBC interview with Hillary Clinton smirked before mentioning there were other unintended consequences of Washington's support for the 1890s anti-Soviet mujahideen that she's seen as a model for this war. This is jarringly flippant way to mention the September 11th attacks. Nonetheless, points to major danger here. Ever since Ukraine's east descended into war 8 years ago following the 2014 revolution, Ukraine has become a mecca for far-right extremists around the world, including the United States, taking inspiration from and even traveling to establish contact with and learn from other Ukrainian counterparts. Already within this war, the world's neo-Nazis and other white supremacists are among thousands of foreign fighters pouring into the country, viewing as a training for violence they plan to carry out back home, including what they think is coming, quote-unquote, boogaloo, or second U.S. Civil War. This has gone shockingly under-discussed in mainstream reporting, even though battling homegrown white supremacists served as the leading rationale for both Joe Biden's presidency and the liberal opposition to Trump. And the idea of armed far-right takeover obsessed much of the U.S. political establishment for the past year. And, I mean, yeah, that is ironic. In all fairness, I'm pretty sure, I mean, yes, there's Russian propaganda, but there's 100% that there's neo-Nazis. The Azov battalion in Ukraine are neo-Nazis, but I'm pretty sure they're pretty, like, skinhead neo-Nazis on the Russian side, too. This whole white supremacist shit is far right. I mean, I'm pretty sure Jacobin thinks that most of the supporters at the January 6th are far right insurrectionists. Dragged out Afghanistan quagmire means more opportunities for combat training for these extremists, who will do God knows what when they come home. Then there's the nukes. Oh yeah, that's I can't forget about that. As awful as the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were, they didn't carry nearly the same nuclear risk prolonged war in Ukraine would, given the involvement, direct and indirect, of governments that control the world's two largest nuclear stockpiles. Yeah, you can think that if everybody's on the edge, some nukes can be fired, or even if the Russian government can be toppled. I mean, I guess they were trying to secure the nukes like they did last time, but who knows? I mean, maybe one of them can slip away somewhere, become a dirty bomb. There's always the risk that fighting could spread beyond Ukraine's borders into nearby NATO member countries, would draw the entirety of the Western Europe into conflict with Russia. The last few years have seen U.S. debate over the idea of stationing nukes in neighboring Poland, potentially location of a Ukrainian government in exile led by current President Vladimir Zelensky. We're only 12 days into Moscow invasion. We really had some alarming nuclear-tinged episodes from Putin putting his nuclear weapons on high alert, partly in response to Western sanctions and shelling in the fire at the compound that holds Europe's largest nuclear power plant. Finally would mean extraordinary to the profound economic disruption that Putin's invasion has only made worse. We're still fighting out what exactly happens when you try to cripple and embargo an economy that makes up 3% of the world's GDP, in the world's third biggest oil producer, fourth largest wheat exporter, provides 40% of the EU's gas supplies. Energy prices are rocketing up, sending the price of everything else soaring, with worse predicted to come. So I think Russia is the fourth largest exporter of wheat, and Ukraine is the fifth largest exporter of wheat. That could probably have bad consequences. Not getting into the issue of climate change. I'm going to skip this one because that's crazy. In short, besides deeply cynical and heartless, turning Ukraine into Iraq and Afghanistan would mean continuing civilian deaths and suffering at a terrible risk with a fire rate blow. One thing that the article doesn't mention, but I don't really expect socialists to understand this, But think about this. For every civilian killed, like every civilian basically has a job and contributed to the economy. And even if they made over their lifetime a modest amount of like $1 million or $500,000 or whatever, that's compounded, meaning that during their life they contributed some money, but made the earth a little bit richer, and then that's the economy will grow and keep compounding after that. So the loss of one civilian could be billions and like give it a long enough time, it could be billions of dollars of lost economic growth. So can you imagine how many productive Russian people and productive Ukrainian citizens or soldiers, how much the world is losing? Permanent heightened nuclear tensions. They already mentioned that. There's no military solution to this war that doesn't make things much, much worse. It may sound as viscerally satisfying, but the solution to the same one that was rejected in the lead up to this invasion, that numerous leading foreign policies voices urged, and which look better every day that this horrible war goes on. Mutually acceptable negotiated settlement that guarantees Ukrainian territorial integrity and gives Moscow a road back from what its point looks like a disastrous miscalculation, while addressing Russia's long-standing security concerns. Ideally, it would be followed by aggressive investment in transitioning away from fossil fuels, undermining the ability of an all oil and gas touting autocrats bully their smaller neighbors and flout international law. We're told that look at the U.S. support for Afghan mujahideen in the 1980s and understand why turning Ukraine into Afghanistan is a good idea. But this example should tell us everything about the danger of unintended consequences and our inability to control the outcomes of the reckless adventurism. Western governments have blundered into too many self-inflicted disasters already. Why not just this once try learning from our mistakes? So, I mean, ever since from the beginning, I've been urging just anybody just anybody strike a peace deal, no matter what, because even if it's perceived that Russia gets the better end of the whatever, and then any peace deal is going to be better than the war that's going to grind on and on and on. Just like I explained before, that just the loss of life and productivity in the economy is going to be much more. Even if you're a heartless and you're just not, obviously you care about people's lives, but I'm just saying, just economically, just losing people and the compound effects of what they would contribute to the economy is much more devastating than whatever. Just officially giving Crimea to Russia, and maybe Russia. I think what would be the most middle of the road peace deal possible at this point, I think, would be just letting Russia keep Crimea, Ukraine sign into the constitution that will never join NATO and any other alliance. It would be a completely neutral nation, and maybe Russia can give parts of the Donbass or resettle the Russian-speaking population or whatever that's been at war to Russia or whatever, and just give some of those territories back, or maybe Russia keep one of them or whatever, and just, that would be so much better than what's going to happen.